gradually then there's just this continued growth of more and more game studios, more and more content. There's more and more money to be made for everybody, so it just keeps growing and growing. And then at some point, which happened, I guess, in the last couple of years, is all right, now there's just too much, and you don't get every single game released on every single operator, and you can't get every partnership that you want because there's just so much content out there. So you have to think, okay, how can we either stand out? How can we provide something different? And I think that's where then the larger companies are looking at smaller studios that are available to offer something different, to complement their existing portfolio of games, to provide something new to operators and to enhance their kind of overall value that they can then present to operators.
This podcast is sponsored by Pragmatic Solutions, the player account management platform chosen by today's smart betting and gaming operators. Don't let technical constraints delay you from achieving your business goals. Expand your business, boost your margins, and dominate the market in any leading regulated jurisdiction with our powerful, flexible, and secure iGaming platform. Enjoy its extensive marketing tools, compliance protection, real-time data, and a wide portfolio of over 1,000 industry providers. It's time to upgrade your technology. Let Pragmatic Solutions show you the modern approach. Visit pragmatic.solutions and join the smart thinkers.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Play, a leading game developer providing player favorites to the most successful brands across the industry. With an award-winning multi-product portfolio of slots, live casino, bingo, virtual sports, and more, Pragmatic Play is powering up new possibilities of play through one single API. Visit pragmaticplay.com and discover your favorite every time.
David, great to have you in the studio, my friend. How is everything?
Yes, excellent. Very, very happy to be here. I'm a long-time listener, first-time contributor, so it's lovely to be here. Looking forward to a nice chat today.
Yeah, and obviously, David, we've known each other for a long time. Also, we were reminiscing here before the podcast about the Spigo days when we shared an office together, and there was beers in the vending machine back in that time.
Yeah, it was my early days in Malta and just being blown away by the difference between having an office with beer in it and, the attitude and the Friday beer camaraderie. You don't get that back in very corporate bland Scotland. So, here I am still in Malta. We've obviously, both of us have had a very good time.
Spigo, a Danish company, of course, so it goes with the stereotype that with beer in the
exactly.
But yeah, here we are in 2025. David, you're the CEO for Swintt, of course, and you've been part of that company for some time. Swintt, obviously, great game studio, aggregator. Can you talk a little bit maybe about the background of Swintt and a little bit more about the company?
Yeah, so we've been around since 2019, founded by David Flynn. I was the first employee that he brought on board, so I've been there for the entire journey and obviously grown with the company as well. We had our own game studio based out of Manila, as well as them forming a strategic partnership with a German land-based provider. And getting the exclusive distribution on those games into the online sector. So since then, we've just continued to grow the business and taken an approach to try and have kind of localized specific content for certain regions. We've seen, of course, with the German land-based games, they work not only across Germany, but Central Europe, Eastern Europe, where the game mechanics are very, very popular. So we've kind of grown since then. We pivoted to looking at different studios that we could bring into the mix, into Swintt, to try and offer a bit more content variety. And last year we made the acquisition of Elysium Studios to really hone in on that diversity and offer something different within our repertoire of content. So we have the kind of land-based, more traditional style games that work extremely well, but they're maybe not the right games for every single market. So looking at where we can try and succeed in, the likes of Northern Europe, Scandinavia, where they want a different type of game. We made the acquisition with Elysium to complement what we already had and really offer that diversity in our portfolio.
I never understood this really, that different geos are looking for different type of games. Like how do they differ in general from geo to geo or from culture? Is it a culture thing kind of thing? Someone passes, or is it like symbols, color? Like what is the difference?
Yeah. I think a lot of it can be kind of historical, right? So, Germany, a very strong land-based tradition from the big names emanating from that region. And so I think players are just so used to that type of content, and it just resonates with them with the style. And then you look at a country like Sweden, very modern country, very, I would say, stylish, and from a gaming perspective, quite a mature market. Players understand much more complex content is much more engaging and exciting, and a lot more action within the games. So they're more used to it. But if you look into Eastern Europe, you have the big brands, EGT and so on. They have significant presence there. So players grow up playing those type of games and get used to them. And I think, that kind of online penetration, the early days of the big Swedish brands have just encouraged and grown that kind of preference for Swedish players and Scandinavian players in general for that kind of content.
Right.
Yeah.
All I know is that the Americans are obsessed with buffaloes for some reason. It's fascinating actually to go into a Las Vegas casino and billions of dollars goes into the incredible architecture, and of all the slot machines that you'll see, half of them is buffalo.
Yeah, and just a massive screen with a buffalo charging towards you with a jackpot in its mouth.
The bigger the buffalo, the better. So the topic of today, in any case, is something really timely, which is essentially that there are a proliferation of game studios today in the industry. Hundreds of game studios out there, more opening up by the day. And so we have gotten to a point now where perhaps there is a saturated landscape. And your kind of pitch today, David, or your thoughts are that we might see a lot of consolidation happening in the next 3 years in the game studio landscape, and trends are now shifting towards kind of bigger studios partnering with smaller studios, and smaller studios having a bit more difficult time, or newer studios have a bit more difficult time to establish themselves without that type of help. So I want to just open up the conversation here to, let's go back in history a little bit. Talk a little bit about how the game studio environment have changed in the 10 or 15 last years. Because, when we started in the industry, there were 3 game studios, let's say, that were relevant. And for me at BetSafe, when I worked there, we only were contracted with 2 game studios, NetEnt and Playtech or something like that.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden the floodgates opened, and now we're then seeing consolidation. Can you talk a little bit more more in detail of the history? Yeah,
it's been quite an interesting shift, right? You have these big titans, NetEnt, Playtech, Microgaming, dominating so much of the space. And they had such a strong position, but I think we're a very entrepreneurial industry, very fast moving. With the advent of mobile gaming and a much more connected world, it just seemed inevitable there would be more diversity. And so around my entry into the Maltese kind of iGaming market, it was just these established players, but you could see some of these smaller challenger brands coming through. Yggdrasil and Quickspin and so on, and Play and Go starting to establish themselves more and more, and then offering diversity just to players. People just want more options. They want better content. They want more exciting games. They want the gamification tools. And a lot of these companies just manage to develop and innovate and think ahead, and just chipping away at the market share, as we all know, and the fall of the giants over some time. Of course, some are still there, but, gradually then there's just this continued growth of more and more game studios, more and more content. There's more and more money to be made for everybody, so it just keeps growing and growing. And then at some point, which happened, I guess, in the last couple of years, is all right, now there's just too much, and you don't get every single game released on every single operator, and you can't get every partnership that you want because there's just so much content out there. So you have to think, okay, how can we either stand out? How can we provide something different? And I think that's where then the larger companies are looking at smaller studios that are available to offer something different, to complement their existing portfolio of games, to provide something new to operators, and to enhance their kind of overall value that they can then present to operators. So looking today at the landscape, there's a lot of these small challenger studios that still come through, but it's very hard to get in edgeways. So to partner with a larger company, and that a more consolidated offering, as you say, obviously then makes sense for the success of the small company and for the larger company as well. So it's quite a kind of cycle that we've been through, and there's definitely a couple of very, very big larger players, and all credit to them for the job that they've done in the market. hopefully there just continues to be more room for everybody. But I think the way that we're heading towards a very spread out kind of market with so many different studios across these markets, but coming from single source platforms and providers, that looks like a model that's probably going to stay for a while.
Right. And so if you are a new game studio in 2025, where you are thinking to launch a new studio, what does it take? What do you have ahead of yourself in order to succeed if you would choose to go completely on your own? Is it even possible at this point?
I think it's still possible. I think there's a lot of very talented people out there, people who know how to build games. You especially see there'll be an acquisition of a game studio. After some time, they'll be there now, and then some of those talented people will jump out and do their own thing because they want to build their own games and make their own money after they exit. So I think there's going to continue to be more and more studios. It's just how do they succeed? So guess deep pockets is often
that's a good way to start.
Yeah, that often helps, because then you can start really spending heavily on the leaks of marketing, which is expensive, but a continuously more important area for the B2B side to spend on, compared to say 10 years ago where you could get away without such massive marketing spend. You can also then look at what are the right partners for the business. So do you just want to focus on building quality content and get it as far and wide as possible? Then you need to partner with that larger studio who offers already a network. They offer licensing. They offer technical support from their technology. They already have it in place. So you just build the games, you get them distributed, and then you can go from there. So there's a few different ways. You could also look at local expertise. Can you provide a very niche product for a certain area? So do you have games that are extremely relevant for, let's say, Germany or for Sweden, and you have local knowledge, you have a great network where you can obviously work with the operators very quickly and appeal to the players. Your content will resonate from day one. So that's another way that we can see. There's a few studios in the market already who do this, and they've done it very successfully over a short space of time with a limited amount of people. So there are still ways, I think, that you can grow as a new studio and you can come in. But to be that massive challenger brand and you want to really take on the biggest and the best and be in full control, it's going to cost you a lot of money.
Yeah, takes some time to, I imagine. I mean, like a classic business strategy in a tough market is to try to conquer a niche and then kind of grow from there. And it sounds like that is potentially the path for new studios too. But I'm curious, there's maybe two sides to becoming a successful studio at this point, which is partly to create great games, but on the other hand, to have a strong commercial kind of arm as well, let's say. And so I had this debate actually with our friend Todd recently, that what is it that creates a success in a game? Is it the commercial push, or is it the quality of the game? Because if you have a great game but it kind of gets lost in the noise, then it might not even have a chance to succeed.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, if you have a game that is great but maybe not the best, but there's a great commercial push behind it, perhaps it has a chance to gain foothold. Because even today, some of the most popular games are 10, 15 years old. They're not the best games, but they are the games that players are used to, perhaps. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, when you think about creating successful games in Swintt, what is most important, do you think? The commercial push or the quality of the game?
Yeah, it's quite a tough one. You definitely need to think about both. I'm convinced that, kind of as you touch on there's going to be some absolutely fantastic games that just barely get the light of day, because they're created by very good people and they've produced a wonderful product, but they just don't get the marketing push and they don't get the support and the commercial behind it to get enough relevance. Every lobby is dominated by a couple of providers and the same games over and over again. So it's really hard to get in there. So there definitely needs to be a tandem approach, and that's where then going into the niche obviously helps, because you have a game that will instantly appeal to both the operator and the player straight away. I think it's difficult to push too much on one side if it's the commercial or if it's in the product itself. You can make a game and spend a lot of time on something that's quality and your team love it and you really get behind it, and the players just don't like it, you know, and that's always the risk. And I think that's why
the formula, right? Like,
exactly, there's no recipe for success. Otherwise, it would all be done and dusty by now. And that's, I think, why you just see this like relentlessly, almost attritional kind of release plan that you just have to get more games because you want to get that one that sticks.
Yeah, is that what you find as well in your game releases, that you got into a point where it's just hard to know which games will succeed, so that's why you try to produce many games rather than like putting all the eggs in one basket, so to say?
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to skimp too much on the quality by keeping up a regular release plan. So you still want to have games coming out regularly. Of course, you just need it for the revenues. Most games typically have this kind of spike around release, and then it's the tail. And the success of the game, then you can see in the tail, okay, it's managed to stick around. We're managed to get more promotions out of operators, and they believe in the games as well. But yeah, it's difficult to lean too much and focus too much on the quality, because then it presents a risk that players just don't like it. So I think some of the most successful games in the industry were, throwaway releases just to chuck into the portfolio and the roadmap, and then they've actually done very, very well. And we've seen in some of our games, a game that we didn't anticipate to perform as well as it has actually become one of our best performing games, and it just has this longevity. We don't know why. We don't see it ourselves of, wow, that's really cool, and that's a game that we want. But the players and the data is the true results of all.
Yeah, that's what keeps things interesting to some extent also, that there isn't this like Bible that you can read on how to create the perfect game the player will love. It's very fine, minute details that makes a game tick with players. It's hard to predict.
It's the randomness, right? We're in the random results industry, so it's the randomness that you don't know exactly which one's going to land right.
Yeah, we're in the gambling industry after all. So, we spoke earlier then, David, of course, that we are going into this kind of next phase now in the game studio environment, where established kind of long-standing studios with great relationships, with great compliance departments that are regulated in many markets, are now starting to consolidate smaller studios into their own fold. Can you talk a little bit more? Can you go a little bit deeper into that trend? Why is that? And go a little bit deeper into that topic, please.
Yeah, looking at it from the two sides, right? The larger provider, they've already got their established network, they've got their operators, they've got a strong commercial team, they've got great technology, the compliance, but they can get more content diversity. They can try and get that game that sticks. And if they have sub-studios plugged into them providing these games, then they're not providing those games through someone else. And if that game succeeds, then of course they're getting part of the revenue share, as well as welcome them into the larger fold, and being able to then approach operators and say, hey, it's not only our games, but it's also these games, which are really, really strong performers, create a more compelling business case for operators to take that integration to do the partnership. From the studio's perspective, you can get a quick leg up. You get the distribution of the games across that operator's network. You can go under their licensing structure, of course, which then grants market access. You can get certified. And then just be part of the larger machine where you know that there's going to be more commercial opportunity. So there's quite a lot of benefits on both sides. And a lot of these smaller studios, some of them are going to be built and saying, okay, let's do 3 to 5 years and plan for an exit. Let's just build up the revenues. You can go in with a very lean team, a small amount of very talented people, build up a good head of steam, the revenues are coming in, and then decide, actually, okay, let's sell the business, and you already have someone there who has all your insights, and they can then take those games into the fold. Some of these smaller studios, however, then they have the risk that they're not in full control, and they're not in control of their destiny. And we've seen a few examples recently of some smaller studios with quality games, building up really good head of steam. And to take that next step, you have to get your own technology stack and be able to grow so that you're in full control, and then you can obviously build and scale and get a higher valuation on the business as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brilliant. And how does this translate into your strategy then, David, as Swintt? So I would imagine that game studios essentially have a choice today, whether to go this direction, lean organization, focus on the quality of the games, and let a partner take care of distribution and so on, or to become that bigger partner that is more than a game studio, that handles all this operational complexity, but then have an opportunity to become bigger, let's say. How do you think about your strategy in Swintt, and what was the rationale for then going down this path of you becoming an aggregator of game studios?
We lean more into the latter there, I think. We've built up a very good business and network of operators that we can lean into with our games, and then having really strong third-party content, as we've had the German games that I mentioned. They've performed extremely well and managed to build up really good base for us, as I said, in a certain region, but to be able to grow and expand that further and look into other markets, we had to then add more diverse content into the mix. So the Elysium Studios acquisition then allows that, and we can look at other options that we have to aggregate or to bring in other games as well. We have other sub-studios, Twin Win Games, Samurai Studios, who offer, again, a different type of game, coming from a different background, with their own experience and knowledge, that they can then provide content that might work in other markets that we don't see the value. So for us, it's building up the right network, building up the right content, and being able to leverage it further and wider. And when you see the way that the industry is heading with a lot of consolidation on the B2C side, larger operators, they're across so many markets. So if you can offer that operator, hey, I cover all of your markets, we have everything covered, so your games are going to get, of course, across many markets, many of their brands, and you can offer a much stronger partnership off the back of it.
Is this a scalable business model, David? So are you able to take in a large amount of game studio partners and scale the amount of games that you produce, or is there also challenges attached to these type of partnerships from a commercial perspective? Your sales team also need to sell and understand the different studios and so on.
Yeah, it touches a lot of areas, right? So the commercial area is one. Operators already have loads of content, so how can you decide which is the right games to push? And the commercial team have to meet their targets, so they want to push the best performing games, or you want to then understand your partners and know them. So, hey, you guys are popular in the Netherlands. Okay, we think these games will work for you. These games should work for you, this operator in the UK, for example. So there's obviously, you need a good understanding within the commercial team if you're going to be taking these games forward, and they have to understand the product heavily. On top of that, the technology, right? If you start plugging in more and more studios, you have more and more dependency, more and more requests coming into your central technical team, your product team, the operations. So you need to be able to be ready and to be able to scale that. There's a couple of providers in the game who are extremely well organized and really, really strong in this position. So I definitely think it's scalable. You just need to be aware that there's a lot of work involved in it, and when you're dealing with multiple third parties and dependencies, a lot of these people they're coming to you, and they depend on you and they expect results. So you need to be able to provide it.
Yeah, and it seems to me that most of the major game studios are moving towards this kind of aggregation model, but perhaps one game studio that stands out on that front is Pragmatic, who have kind of chosen not to go down that path, and they have ended up kind of dominating the space to some extent. And so there's also a question to be asked, I suppose, which is like, is there a way to kind of consolidate game studio partners into one brand, perhaps, to make it to make that brand more prominent, or to push certain games but not all, and so on? I don't know, like, do you see that also as a bit of a part of the success of Prague, that they are like focused on their own roadmap kind of thing? I don't know, how do you see?
Yeah, I think that definitely helps, right? And the way that they've built their engagement tools across all Pragmatic Play games, they can leverage the brand, the identity, all in one, and really push it very strong. I definitely think that helps. If you see, say, Games Global, where they have so many studios plugged in as well.
That's the opposite, right? Games Global are the ones who are aggregating the most operators, the most game studios. Yes.
They have so many, but they have brands that are kind of part of the fold, as well as then kind of third parties that go through their platform as well. But you're dealing with Central Games Global as well as an operator. So it just makes it easier that you just have this one entity to deal with. If you look at Relax Gaming, they have a number of different studios that run through their platform as well. So they also provide this service where you can plug it all in, but then they also have their own games as well to go through it. So I think in the case of, say, Pragmatic, the job that they've done is absolutely fantastic, and amazing that they built it up with just their own studio. They obviously have significant amount of game developers and studios to be able to make so many great games and lean into that they haven't needed to kind of expand and look further, whereas Games Global, it seems to have done that since the early days.
Yeah, interesting. talk a little bit more about Swintt itself now. So you have a couple of game studio partners that you partnered with. Talk a little bit more about them, and then just in general, what is the focus of the business at this very moment?
Yeah, so like I mentioned about we have our German partners. Those games are very typically land-based German, and they have a very strong appeal. And looking across certain markets, as I've mentioned, they perform very well. Germany, Central Europe, Netherlands, and so on. So to complement that, we obviously looked at the Elysium studios that we own, where it's people they used to work in Red Tiger. They built games more for the kind of northern Scandinavian markets. Then looking at the Swintt Studios project, we partnered with the guys at Twin Win Games. They've been around for quite some time developing content for third parties that you can acquire. So they would build games that you can then own the IP and take that game forward and brand it as Swintt or Pragmatic, whatever you want. And they've managed to obviously lean into their experience where they've built games for so many different studios, and they have the knowledge of different game models and mechanics and maths. So we partnered with them in order to take their content as something a bit different into the market, and lean into their experience of building such a wide range of games for different providers. So we've had a couple of games from them. We just had a game release this week as well. And obviously we're looking to see if there's going to be more content that can come through that. We also have Samurai Studios that we partnered, a Japanese brand. So, there's not any Japanese game providers in their industry. Japan is, one of these kind of future frontiers once it finally regulates, and we'll see what kind of footprint they're going to be able to get. So these guys obviously are early entrants looking to try and make a name for themselves early stage. What is going to be that Japanese exposure to it? And we've seen what Japan has done with technology. We've listened to Supernova in the East, and we're aware of the Japanese culture and the attitudes towards business. So, I wouldn't be surprised in 10, 15 years that there's some significant Japanese slot studio absolutely killing it in the market, right? So yeah, I trying to get that diversity in our portfolio and leaning into different experience and knowledge from different companies has been part of bringing these different studios into the mix as well.
Yeah, brilliant. We were talking just before the podcast here about the best podcast in the history of podcasts with Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. If anyone is into history, that is the one podcast to watch. He produces one episode every 6 months, and he's done so for the last 15 years or something like that. And Supernova in the East with World War II history from a Japanese perspective is the 55-hour long podcast.
Yeah, it's worth setting the time aside just so you can understand. Yeah. And he has this amazing part where he obviously runs through the kind of the history of Japan in this very short space of time, where it goes from this feudal kind of system, and all of a sudden they start looking, how can we be the best at this, at that, and looking at different countries and systems across the world and adapting it to create the Japan that is today. And speaking to people who live in Japan and people who know the culture very well, and they say like it's exactly spot on. That's how the country has developed.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. And there seems to be a lot of movement within the Japanese market at the moment. There's also, the classic game producer Sega, who entered iGaming also now with a few acquisitions, coming from that. And I believe Samurai Studios also have the background from producing video games as well, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, exactly. They're part of the Natsume Atari group. So not the old Atari that we all know from back in the 80s and 90s, but Natsume Atari, where they've developed video games and they have a background there, as well as a typical kind of Japanese conglomerate, pachinko machines and different types of gambling machines and claw machines and so on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brilliant. So the big question is now then, as we look forward now, how do you think the game studio environment now is going to continue to evolve? So we've gone through this kind of epochs, let's say, and we are now at the point where there's an oversaturated amount of game studios in the market. How do you think this all will play out?
I think we're going to continue to see a lot of small studios, boutique brands with very talented people popping up and looking for that distribution. So whether they go through Games Global or Relax, a Swintt, and providing really quality games either for a local niche or just very, very high quality, diverse games. I think we're going to see more and more of these studios still popping up, but not necessarily using their own technology and relying from third parties. You'll still get your challenger brands to come through that are really making a big name and big waves in the industry. And for sure, stepping out of slots a bit, it looks like the saturation is coming for live casino, because there are just a remarkable amount of live casino studios popping up, and new game providers looking to diversify their options. So if you're a long-established slots provider and you can work on setting up your own live studio, then you can of course leverage that product into the portfolio as well. Pragmatic have done it already, but there's definitely many more who are stepping into this space. So I'm expecting to see even more challengers coming through there, and that then leads to more innovation and more exciting content for players.
That's something you were thinking about, the live space?
We have some fingers in the live space already. We had the Swintt Live product for quite some time. It was working with a third party. They had the game studio, they had the technology, and we were able to bring it to the market as Swintt Live. For some time, due to some operational reasons, those games are disabled at the moment, but they're going to come back better and stronger again. But we have had exposure into the live space as well, and that's just one entrant, right? There's already, looking ahead, when we visit ICE or any other conference, there's going to be so many new live studios. It's going to be remarkable, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because Evolution can learn from the mistakes of NetEnt and losing their grip, and Evolution is a very, very well-oiled machine. So will they actually be losing market share, or as the market grows, are they going to continue to grow, but all these other brands are going to come up as well? Right.
Speaking about Evo, they recently had some regulatory headwinds in the UK, where the UK regulator is essentially trying to thwart Evo from offering their games to unregulated players within the market. And Phil Pearson, our good friend, he made the argument that moving forward, one of the trends for the game studios could potentially be that regulators will put strict requirements on the game studios that if you want to operate in this market, you cannot offer your games to unregulated players, essentially. So Phil argues that there will be kind of like a road choice for the suppliers at some point, that it's not a free-for-all. Let's say you either choose the regulated path or the grey path. Is that something you can resonate with as well? Do you think that the trend is going to take foothold as well, more and more as we go forward? Are the regulators becoming more stringent and aware?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, you want to be in the white markets. You want to be, obeying all the rules, so long as the compliance is reasonable and makes sense. Some markets are just terrible to work in, and some markets are a bit more flexible and engaging, and you can deal with the regulators directly. So I wouldn't be surprised, and where you have small challenger brands trying to come through, they will probably just lean straight into the grey space, because there's not all the prohibitive costs and compliance requirements. They can just go for the grey markets, make their money if they're willing to take that risk, and then they can grow from there. We at Swintt, we have a white approach. We're part of a larger Glitnor group where we have, of course, very strong regulated brands already. So for us, entering into new regulated markets is important to grow that business, and the kind of dwindling appeal and availability of grey markets as well. It's a different game from 10 years ago, right? So it looks like it's going to continue to get white. Even then, if you look at the US, which is kind of ultra white, apart from sweepstakes again, so you've got grey there. But I think there's definitely going to be studios that are going to say, let's just go for the grey space and push in that direction, and make a quick buck, so long as they have, of course, the right operators and risk appetite behind them.
Yeah, so because our origin is very much from when the whole industry was grey. There wasn't really any regulated markets. You operated from an MGA license, and that gave you access to the world. Whereas now clearly the industry is turning more into a more nuanced black and white, not so much grey anymore. It's either the market is regulated, and if you're not regulated, you're a black operator, or you're regulated and you're fully compliant and white and so on. So it really seems like the industry is dividing to some extent. There were either you choose that kind of regulated path and you're on that path, or you choose maybe not so much grey, but actually more towards the black side of things.
Dark grey.
Dark grey, let's call it. 50 shades of grey.
The players are the ones who decide as well, though, right? You can see some markets, the channelization rates are falling across certain markets. It becomes too prohibitive. Players are it's the internet. You know, players are going to find a way to play the games they want and have more fun. It's just inevitable. So looking at the accessibility and the ease of, you know, playing through crypto or for players to find on licensed sites, you know, it's not really that difficult for them. So inevitably they're going to play where they can get the most fun. And in heavily regulated markets, you start losing the VIPs where all the money is. You know, if they have, you can only bet €5, €10, whatever. I mean, that's not enough. They're not going to have fun, so they need to play somewhere. So it's inevitable they go towards the grey markets anyway. So you have this typical risk of, by growing the white, then you're ostracizing some players. They get pushed apart. They go in their own direction, and then, there's money there.
So there's never a time where you as Swintt, you're like, the grey markets are much easier, much more profitable, so on. You stick with the regulated approach.
We will stick with a regulated approach. That's not to say that I don't think the grey markets are going to be much easier. But for sure, you know, like to go in the white revenues, it's much more. It's a safer, more understandable kind of revenue stream. You can obviously plan and forecast much easier. You just hope for the regulators not to be too fickle and to listen to the industry. You know, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, right? So we're not going to be expected that we're going to come in there and be able to close down any kind of debate and get what the industry wants, which is more money, of course. But there's always going to be reasons to listen to us because we know the players, we know the markets, and even the biggest, whitest operators will say, if you make this too regulated, you're going to turn away a lot of players already, and we see it in so many markets.
I think from my perspective. If we go back to the 2010s, where the industry was flying under the radar in the beginning of the decennia, wasn't really making much fuss around the political landscape. But then at some point, the industry became too big to ignore. Too much marketing, too much problems, and eventually it came to surface. And as a result of that, we saw this wave of regulation. Now, since then, there's been a thriving grey and black market that is not really talked about, just like the industry itself was not talked about 10, 15 years ago, let's say. But I think it's just a matter of time before the unregulated kind of part of the market becomes a debate on a political level as well. It just seems like right now politicians are just not aware, perhaps, that there are these two kind of opposing forces, and we actually need to work together with the regulated operators, give them a chance to be competitive in order to beat the unregulated side of things. Like that doesn't seem to exist too much today, but more as we go forward. I do think that eventually, just like the debate around the industry itself became a thing in the mid-2010s, eventually that will also happen for the unregulated space too. It will be the day of reckoning at some point, I think.
I mean, how do you stop it, right, is one of the problems. But, you know, operators...
You need to make the regulated operators competitive. I think that's
exactly. Like the operators, if they have lobby groups or they're able to at least get in dialogue with the regulators and in turn with politicians, you know, they have to say, we're the good guys here, and you keep coming after us and you keep penalising us and make it stricter, make it harder. This is having the opposite effect of what you want, but... You know, our industry is just such an easy target. It's like, we're going to tax gambling more, and the crowd cheers and everyone claps on the bus kind of thing. You know, it's a shame, but it's the nature of the game. And I don't think there's many countries where there's so much engaging dialogue and kind of positivity towards the sector. The UK, you know, we have a long tradition with gambling and horse racing and so on. So there's some cultural elements of the Grand National and so on, but it has been this kind of chipping away at it, and we're all kind of expecting stricter and stricter regulations to come over time as well.
I think also a problem before we move on here is it's been really hard to gauge the size of the black market, and you see kind of estimations of channelization rate, like how many players are playing on regulated sites versus unregulated sites. But what are those surveys based on? Like, and it's quite basic ways to try to present some form of number. But a tool that is really interesting now that is being developed and already launched is a good partner of ours at Blask, which are essentially doing deep market research into each market to understand how big is each market, but then how big is each operator within that market? Like what market share does each operator have within the Swedish market, including the unregulated operators? And that becomes a really good way to lift the veil of the market and show that, like, okay, this is how let's say the black market actually looks like.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to then highlight to like politicians, regulators, or the general public how big the issue is, let's say. So that'll be interesting also to see kind of moving forward how that will impact. Same in the US as well. There's a lot of debate around how big is the black market. Widely different estimations, and no one is really sure how big it is. But now you'll be able to actually see how big the black market is. So interesting to see.
It's an interesting thought. I'm aware of the product. I never thought of it in the way of you could actually then take it to a political level and use it.
For sure.
I would imagine, let's say, the most surefire way to get political attention of a growing black market would be less tax revenues for the government, and of course then they're like, where's our money going? It's
exactly.
Disappearing.
It's exactly gone. So if you can show to the American regulators, let's say in the state of California, for example, this is the amount of online gambling activity that is happening within your state right now, and this means that you are losing out on, well, first and foremost, that potentially billions of dollars are exiting the state of California, and secondly that you're not getting any tax revenue. That becomes all of a sudden a much more powerful way to see the problem that is there. Right now.
Follow the money. It's always going to come back. It's always going to come back to money, right? That's how it goes.
For sure.
And it's good to see the US gradually more and more states regulating and be able to kind of take that stand. And again, it comes back to tax. You see it all the time. Able to plug holes in the local economy by taxing something that is already going on, just in an unregulated way. Yeah,
for sure. So moving back into the game studio space, David, are there any other trends that are happening within the vertical at the moment that you are paying extra attention to?
I think I touched on one of them, which is the rising number of live dealer product that's out there, and there's also a kind of rise in gamification. Now that's the kind of, it's been a buzzword and people saying it for some time, but let's call it engagement tools. There's definitely more and more engagement tools and variety and innovation within that sector to try and produce more and more engagement and something different for the players. I think within slots it's very hard to innovate in general.
We are still playing real base slots after 150 years or whatever it is.
Exactly.
Amazing, right?
Yeah, and it continues, right? Don't break a winning formula, but I think that there's some trends within game development. There's the hold and win features are becoming even more prominent, and a lot of the kind of classic land-based features are going to get more and more popular as well, because players know them, they resonate with them, they make money. Simple as combine it with gamification tools where players get more for their money, they get more engagement. I think it's just, we're going to continue to see this trend going forward as it is.
So on the gamification side, it's like a trade-off there, right, where on the one hand, gamification makes the experience more fun, but perhaps the product becomes a bit more complicated. Or another way is to produce very simple experiences, intuitive, fast loading times and so on. Is that also part of this kind of differentiation in different geos, appreciating different ways to gamble, do you think? Is it some geos that resonate better with the gamification experience versus just a very simple, intuitive, very quick, easy way to start?
I would think so. I think those markets where more traditional land-based style games are very popular. Your 3-reel slots and fire and sevens, those classic types of games. There's a whole range of them, and they make a lot of money because a lot of players really enjoy them. I think those markets, are a bit kind of lagging behind your Scandinavian markets and UK and so on, where you can really launch so many different features and complex mechanics and gamification at them, and they understand it and they enjoy it and they get it. One trend actually that I can think of as well is jackpots. It seems that there's more and more jackpot products coming through continuously, and where you can get innovation there. I remember when Red Tiger came out with their daily timed jackpots, hourly jackpots, very successful, very popular, and you're starting to see a lot of clones of those, of giving players more, right? It's more excitement, it's more jackpots, it's more chance to win. Me as a player, and I imagine this then resonates with many others, when I see a mega moolah jackpot of 20 million, I'm never going to win it. But if I see a jackpot there of 5k and I know that someone an hour ago just won 20k, I'm like, maybe I can win that one. Maybe it's worth playing. And it's about showing the player that maybe this spin is the one you win. With a 20 million jackpot, it's like a lottery ticket. And you just, I don't feel it's as kind of tangible, whereas it's small, more frequent jackpots. And there's quite a few different studios out there making all different types of jackpot products and jackpot tools, how they can get more for players and more out of the games as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Final question for you today, David. If you think 3 years down the line, so 2 questions in one here, how do you think the game studio landscape is going to look at that time? The bigger getting bigger, the smaller having a hard time, for example. And where do you see Swintt's place within the vertical in 3 years' time?
I expect that a lot of the bigger will get bigger. I think there's definitely going to be quite a lot of that. But that can be supplemented by the small studios that plug in there. So you have guys that have, made an exit from a business. They're very talented. They know slots. They know the market, and they can produce really great content. They can take those games to a larger partner and be part of the fold and make their money through that direction and offer that content variety, plug into their jackpot tools, for example, and get access to more markets. I expect that to continue, but you're going to see a lot of the bigger guys getting, I think, much more dominant position. But there's still going to be space, given the way of the market and localized content and games that work in certain areas. I think there's still going to be space for slightly smaller brands. And so long as you have a good player base, you have content that resonates, you have nice partnerships already, I think you can still survive in a company like Swintt. Our strategy to offer diversity in our games, be it through third-party studios, be it through studios that we own, we're going to continue on that path and look at how we can try and provide games for the right areas, for the right operators, and engage with players in that direction. In 3 years' time, we'll see how things pan out, but we want to be able to provide a nice diverse content base for our partners, and then work with third parties that can obviously produce those games or be part of the fold with us.
Brilliant, David. We've come a long way since our Soho Beer Friday vending machine days. It's great to be here 11 years later and whatnot. And thank you so much for coming by here today.
Yeah, thanks. Been a pleasure. Cheers.
Thank you. Awesome, man.
Cool.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that we got hardcore history in there also. That was important.
Cheers.
Fantastic.